She was never meant to be on the front lines. Nancy Roberts was trained to move quietly through European villages, blending into crowds, delivering coded messages that determined where entire divisions would strike next. But on the night of August 14, 1944, just outside the dense hedgerows south of Falaise, she wasn't carrying a message for command. She was carrying the lives of 62 stranded American soldiers who had no idea that German infantry was moving toward them from 3 directions. It wasn't their commander who stood between them and disaster. It was a 23-year-old woman who didn't even have a rifle. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and gunpowder. Distant artillery thundered like a storm rolling across the valley. Nancy's boots pressed into soft mud as she crouched, listening. She could hear German voices, 2 patrols moving parallel, closing in. They weren't searching by accident. Someone had intercepted radio chatter and knew American forces were attempting to retreat through the Orchard Road. If the Germans reached the crossroad first, every soldier waiting in the woods would be cut down before sunrise. Nancy's heartbeat quickened, but her face remained calm. She had learned early in the OSS that panic wasn't an emotion, it was a choice. Her fingers gripped the thin leather pouch strapped beneath her coat. Inside were forged travel documents, ration stamps, a lipstick-sized cyanide capsule she prayed she'd never use, and one final coded slip meant for an Allied recon unit that never received her transmission. She had to choose whether to abandon her orders or break protocol to save her own side. She moved silently through tall grass, the moon barely visible through thick clouds. She could hear boots striking gravel, German patrol approaching. Their lanterns cast shaky halos of yellow light. She dropped flat against the ground, her face inches from crushed leaves. One German stopped, turning his head sharply as if he sensed another presence. Nancy closed her eyes, slowed her breath, counting each exhale just like she'd been trained. After 10 seconds, the patrol continued walking, boots fading back into the rustling wind. She waited 5 minutes before rising, knowing even a rushed movement could have exposed her. Ahead of her, down a slope, dim shapes moved. American soldiers huddled behind broken stone walls, exhausted, covered in dust and dried blood. Many had been marching for 36 hours with barely any food or water. Their commanding officer, Captain Harlow, looked up as Nancy approached silently from between apple trees. "You again?" he whispered sharply. The last time he saw her, she had walked straight into a German checkpoint near Argentan with nothing but a bicycle and a forged permit, and returned alive, maps memorized, enemy positions marked in charcoal across stolen parchment. "There's no time to argue," she whispered. "2 patrols are closing in. If they reach the crossroad, you're boxed in. We need to move west, through the farms, now." Harlow exhaled, rubbing his temples. "That route is unsecured. If you're wrong, we walk straight into machine gun nests." Nancy stepped closer, her voice calm but unwavering. "If we stay here, they'll corner us in the dark. If we move, we still have a chance before they mobilize armor. I heard them. They know you're here." The soldiers nearby exchanged tired, uneasy glances. They didn't want to follow a civilian, much less a woman, especially one without rank or uniform markings. But they also hadn't survived the past week without learning that fate favored those who listened to warnings, even ones wrapped in unfamiliar voices. Finally, Captain Harlow gave a slow nod. "Fine, but you lead." Nancy turned sharply, moving ahead without hesitation. Her steps were quick but measured. The orchard soil softened their movement, masking sound. Behind her, boots shuffled silently, weapons held tight. She led them through fields lined with broken carts and burnt farmhouses, the faint glow of distant fires outlining shattered wood. Halfway across the field, a flare exploded overhead, bathing the ground in chilling white light. Soldiers froze, dropping to their knees. German machine gun fire erupted from the direction they had originally planned to retreat, exactly where Nancy warned them not to go. Bullets tore through tree trunks, splinters spraying like shrapnel. If they had stayed in the orchard even 10 minutes longer, they would have been trapped there. Nancy didn't look back. She crawled forward, leading them through trenches carved by rainwater. The flare faded. Darkness returned. The only sound was heavy breathing and distant shouts in German. 10 minutes later, the group reached an abandoned farmhouse overlooking a narrow dirt road. Nancy signaled them to stop. She knelt beside a broken wagon wheel, pressing her ear toward the ground. She could hear rumbling, engines, German trucks moving toward the village ahead. They needed a diversion. She reached into her coat and pulled out a torn map, spreading it across the dirt floor as soldiers crowded around. With charcoal, she marked the German routes she overheard earlier and pointed toward a small bridge near the river bend. If we detour here, cross before dawn, and stay off the main road, we'll reach Allied lines by sunrise. Captain Harlow frowned. "We need proof," he whispered. "We can't lead dozens of men across enemy lines based on a hunch." Nancy looked him directly in the eyes. "Then let me get you proof." Before anyone could question her further, she slipped back into the night. No weapon, no backup, just forged papers and nerves carved from months of brushing against death. She approached the road where German vehicles passed slowly, soldiers scanning the fields with reflective eyes. Nancy removed her coat, revealing patched civilian attire coated with dirt, the disguise she'd used to move through French towns. She stepped toward the road, carrying a small basket of apples she had collected earlier, not for food, but for cover. As a truck halted, a German officer stepped toward her, shouting a demand in rough French. Nancy lowered her head, acting frightened, gripping her forged identification card. The officer grabbed it, scanning it beneath lantern light. He questioned her aggressively. Where was she traveling? Who was her employer? Why was she out after curfew? Nancy forced her voice to tremble. "My uncle's farm. They need help with livestock. The Americans are close. We fear fighting." Her accent, softened from months of training, passed well enough to avoid suspicion. The officer signaled 2 soldiers to check her basket. They found only fruit, torn cloths, and a loaf of stale bread. Nothing suspicious. He returned her papers, dismissing her with a bored wave. But what he didn't notice was that Nancy, while handing her papers back, leaned slightly toward the truck bed, counting crates of ammunition, spotting fuel containers, and overhearing their destination whispered among drivers. She turned away slowly, resisting the urge to run. The moment she was out of sight, her walk shifted from timid to calculated. She had heard everything she needed. The Germans were blocking the northern bridge, but the southern crossing is lightly guarded and would be clear for at least an hour before reinforcements arrived. She moved back to the house, this time with certainty burning in her eyes. "They're preparing to mobilize north. We go south. Move now." And for the first time, the soldiers didn't hesitate. They followed her into darkness, their lives suspended over a single fragile line of trust placed in a woman history would never officially record. If only they knew what was still waiting ahead. The night air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and smoke from distant fires. Nancy Roberts led the exhausted soldiers through narrow hedgerows, each step carefully calculated to avoid detection. Their breathing was shallow, hearts pounding in rhythm with the distant rumble of German vehicles. The southern bridge, the only escape route she had identified, was just over a mile away, but it might as well have been 100. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle in the grass a potential threat. Nancy's mind raced. She had memorized the patrol schedules, the rough terrain, and the enemy's projected movements, but execution under pressure was never easy. The soldiers whispered among themselves, voices barely above the wind. They were tired, frightened, but still clung to the hope that this young woman who had walked through enemy lines before would guide them safely. She had that rare combination of calm intelligence and unwavering courage that made fear irrelevant, at least in her presence. Suddenly, a faint snap echoed from behind, a branch crushed underfoot. Heads turned sharply. Nancy froze, hand raised, signaling silence. The soldiers dropped to the muddy ground, eyes scanning the darkness. Moments passed, the only sound the distant thrum of artillery. She motioned for them to move again, slower now, more cautious, each step measured, deliberate. Even minor mistakes could be fatal. As they approached a clearing, Nancy spotted the first signs of German searchlights swinging across the field. The beams of light cut through the darkness, momentarily revealing the terrified faces of the men huddled behind her. If they were caught here, even briefly, the soldiers would be easy targets. Her heart skipped, but outwardly she remained composed. She knew instinctively that hesitation now could cost lives. She whispered instructions, assigning pairs of soldiers to watch specific sectors, using hand signals they had practiced earlier. Nancy led by example, creeping low, moving through the mud as silently as a shadow. They reached a narrow farm track lined with broken fences and overgrown hedges. The German patrols were closer now, audible voices murmuring commands, footsteps crunching against gravel. One soldier stifled a cough. Nancy's glare reminded him to breathe softly. Time had slowed, stretched thin by fear and adrenaline. Finally, they reached the edge of the river that led to the southern bridge. The water was swollen from recent rains, its current deceptively strong. But the bridge itself was lightly guarded, just as she had calculated. She motioned for the soldiers to stop. Using small gestures, she instructed a few men to gather loose planks from a nearby barn to reinforce the bridge temporarily, in case it creaked and alerted the enemy. Every movement had to be silent. The smallest sound could be catastrophic. From the shadows, she observed a German sentry pacing near the bridge entrance. Nancy considered the options. A direct confrontation was out of the question. Her group was outnumbered, outgunned, and the last thing they needed was a firefight. Instead, she improvised a diversion. She picked up a small stone and tossed it into a pile of rubble several hundred feet away. The sentry's head snapped toward the noise, hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Nancy motioned for her group to cross, one by one, with precise timing. The first soldier stepped onto the bridge, knees trembling, eyes fixed on Nancy. She nodded, barely moving her lips, signaling him to hurry. Step by step, the group moved in near-perfect coordination. The sentry was distracted, and the moment passed. Only Nancy remained on the near side, scanning the darkness for any further threats. She would be last to cross, ensuring the path remained clear. Every fiber of her being was focused, senses heightened. She knew that the difference between life and death could be measured in seconds. As the last soldier stepped onto the bridge, a German truck approached from the north, headlights cutting across the water. Nancy froze. Any misstep now would expose the group. Thinking quickly, she dropped to the ground, pulling a faded blanket from her coat and laying it across the planks at the edge of the riverbank. It created the illusion of a shadowed corner, a natural obstruction that hid movement from the approaching headlights. She waited, holding her breath, feeling the chill of the night seep into her bones. The truck passed, without incident. The sentry still unaware of the lives just inches away from discovery. Once all soldiers had safely crossed, Nancy made her way onto the bridge herself. The weight of responsibility bore down on her shoulders, but she didn't falter. Her eyes swept the area continuously, alert to any movement. They reached the far side without incident, and for the first time in hours, Nancy allowed herself a small exhale. The men around her were alive because she had planned, calculated, and taken risks no one else would. Yet the night was far from over. Beyond the bridge lay open fields, the remnants of villages devastated by months of fighting, and German patrols that could appear at any moment. They had survived one challenge, but the war was relentless, and the path ahead was uncertain. She led them through the fields, taking a winding route through orchards and partially destroyed farmhouses, careful to avoid obvious paths. Nancy knew that German reinforcements would likely follow, and any trace of their crossing could draw attention. The soldiers, exhausted, struggled to keep pace. Nancy offered words of encouragement, simple and quiet, keeping their morale from breaking. Every whispered instruction, every gesture was crucial. She had learned that even minor psychological support could make the difference between panic and perseverance in moments like this. Hours passed in tense silence, the night pressing down like a living thing. Nancy scanned the horizon constantly, noting every sound and shadow. Occasionally, she paused to let the soldiers rest, crouched in the underbrush. Her training, her experience, and her innate intelligence guided every movement. One miscalculation could compromise the entire group. Yet, through skill, patience, and sheer determination, she continued, each step bringing them closer to Allied lines and further from certain death. By the first light of dawn, the group reached the outskirts of a small French village. Nancy motioned for silence and led them along a side street, avoiding main thoroughfares where German patrols might appear. The village was quiet, eerily calm, scarred by months of conflict. Houses stood with shattered windows, walls pockmarked by bullets, and doors hanging loosely on broken hinges. Children's toys lay abandoned in the streets, and the smell of smoke and charred wood lingered in the air. It was a stark reminder of the war's relentless toll on civilians, and Nancy's mission intertwined the fates of both soldiers and innocents alike. The soldiers, now fatigued but alive, glanced at Nancy with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some had been skeptical at first, questioning whether following a young courier could truly lead them to safety. But their survival, step by painstaking step, had proven her instincts and courage undeniable. Nancy, meanwhile, remained focused, aware that the enemy could still appear at any moment. Her mind raced ahead, planning the next stage of their journey, anticipating dangers that none of the soldiers yet perceived. She led them through the fields, taking a winding route through orchards and partially destroyed farmhouses, careful to avoid obvious paths. The soldiers, exhausted, struggled to keep pace. Nancy offered words of encouragement, simple and quiet, keeping their morale from breaking. Every whispered instruction, every gesture was crucial. She had learned that even minor psychological support could make the difference between panic and perseverance in moments like this. Hours passed in tense silence, the night pressing down like a living thing. Nancy scanned the horizon constantly, noting every sound and shadow. Occasionally, she paused to let the soldiers rest, crouched in the underbrush. Her training, her experience, and her innate intelligence guided every movement. One miscalculation could compromise the entire group. Yet, through skill, patience, and sheer determination, she continued, each step bringing them closer to Allied lines and further from certain death. By the first light of dawn, the group reached the outskirts of a small French village. Nancy motioned for silence and led them along a side street, avoiding main thoroughfares where German patrols might appear. The village was quiet, eerily calm, scarred by months of conflict. Houses stood with shattered windows, walls pockmarked by bullets, and doors hanging loosely on broken hinges. Children's toys lay abandoned in the streets, and the smell of smoke and charred wood lingered in the air. It was a stark reminder of the war's relentless toll on civilians, and Nancy's mission intertwined the fates of both soldiers and innocents alike. The soldiers, now fatigued but alive, glanced at Nancy with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some had been skeptical at first, questioning whether following a young courier could truly lead them to safety. But their survival, step by painstaking step, had proven her instincts and courage undeniable. Nancy, meanwhile, remained focused, aware that the enemy could still appear at any moment. Her mind raced ahead, planning the next stage of their journey, anticipating dangers that none of the soldiers yet perceived. She led them to a hidden path behind the village, a trail partially obscured by fallen trees and thick underbrush. Here, she explained the next stage of their movement in quiet, urgent tones. They would need to move carefully, avoiding known German checkpoints, until they could rendezvous with a friendly reconnaissance unit. Every soldier absorbed the instructions, nodding silently, understanding the gravity of their situation. Nancy's clarity, her calm demeanor, and her calculated decisiveness kept the group together and focused, even as fatigue and fear gnawed at their resolve. By the time the sun rose fully, casting pale light across the ravaged landscape, Nancy and the soldiers had made significant progress. They were no longer in immediate danger, yet the path ahead remained fraught with uncertainty. Every moment required vigilance, every movement demanded precision. And yet, through all of it, Nancy Roberts had proven that courage, intelligence, and unshakable resolve could bend the course of fate, saving lives in ways history might never fully record. The sun rose higher, but the danger had not diminished. Nancy Roberts led her exhausted unit along the overgrown trail, each step carefully placed to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. Every shadow could hide a German scout, every distant noise a potential trap. The men had learned to trust her instincts, but even their faith could not erase the fatigue etched into their faces. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies aching from hours of movement under a starlit sky that offered no comfort. Nancy, however, remained vigilant, her senses sharpened by months of navigating enemy territory, by countless missions where a single misstep meant death. As they approached the outskirts of another village, Nancy stopped abruptly, pressing a hand to her lips. Ahead, a German reconnaissance patrol moved down the main road, rifles slung and boots crunching against cobblestones. Their presence would make any direct passage impossible, yet the unit had no choice but to continue. Nancy crouched behind a stone wall, calculating, weighing options in silence. She scanned the patrol's formation, noting each soldier's position, the rhythm of their march, and the weak points in their perimeter. "You'll need to follow my lead, exactly as I say," she whispered. The soldiers nodded silently, some gripping their rifles, others clutching makeshift weapons, all dependent on her guidance. "We'll split the patrol. Half goes left into the barn, half all draw to the right. Timing must be perfect." Her voice was calm, unwavering, infused with authority that belied her age. Every movement had been rehearsed mentally, every contingency accounted for. This was the delicate dance of survival, where precision could mean life and hesitation could mean death. Nancy moved first, stepping lightly into the shadows along the barn wall. She carried only a small lantern, its flickering light masked by her coat, and used it to signal to the soldiers the exact moment to move. As she approached the edge of the patrol's path, she tossed a small pouch filled with gravel into a heap of broken crates. The sound drew the attention of the German soldiers. They glanced toward the noise, rifles raised, eyes scanning the darkness. Nancy ducked low, her breath steady, counting every second until the patrol split exactly as she had anticipated. Behind her, the American soldiers moved, keeping low, silent, shadows among shadows. Step by step, they passed the patrol without incident. Nancy's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the acute awareness of how fragile their safety was. They had made it this far, but every second increased the chance that something could go wrong. One miscalculation, one soldier stumbling, and the carefully laid plan would collapse. As they continued through the village, they encountered the remnants of a German supply cache. Boxes of rations, ammunition crates, and discarded helmets littered the street. Nancy quickly assessed the situation, realizing the patrol's route had not yet returned to this area. She used the opportunity to mark the buildings with small chalk symbols, subtle guides that would help them navigate back if they were forced to retreat. Every mark, every gesture was part of a larger plan, invisible to any enemy observer, but crucial to their survival. The soldiers followed her without question. Even in exhaustion, they recognized the precision in their movements, the calculated decisions, and the unspoken understanding that Nancy Roberts was not merely a courier. She was a strategist, a mind capable of seeing 3 moves ahead while walking blind through danger. Her courage was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, unwavering, and absolute. That quiet courage kept them alive. Suddenly, a faint whistle pierced the morning air. Nancy froze, instantly crouching behind a low stone wall. German voices followed, sharper and more insistent than before. The patrol had called for reinforcements. Time was slipping, and the margin for error was disappearing. Nancy scanned her surroundings, identifying a partially collapsed fence that would provide temporary cover. "Move now," she whispered urgently. The soldiers obeyed, their trust in her instincts overriding fear. Step by careful step, they edged toward the fence, hearts hammering, senses straining for any hint of movement. Once safely behind the fence, Nancy paused, listening. The sound of boots, the occasional shout, and the harsh scraping of metal filled the air. She realized that the patrol would circle the village within the next 10 minutes, and if they did, the escape route would be cut off. She needed a diversion, something to draw attention away from the soldiers' path. Her eyes fell upon a stack of barrels nearby, half broken and filled with flammable liquid. She motioned for one of the younger soldiers to help her tip them toward the edge of the road. With a match, the barrels ignited in a sudden flare, smoke billowing and sparks flying. The patrol shouted in alarm, rifles aimed at the fire, giving the soldiers a narrow window to slip past unnoticed. Nancy led them quickly but cautiously through the open street, counting each step, ensuring no one lagged behind. They reached the outskirts, where the forest opened into a small clearing. Here they could rest for a moment, but the danger had not passed. German forces were methodical, and she knew that their pursuit would be relentless. She whispered instructions for maintaining silence, for keeping the group together, for watching each other's backs. Every movement had to be precise, every decision deliberate. In the theater of war, even the smallest mistake could be catastrophic. Hours passed, and the group continued under Nancy's guidance, moving through dense woods and across open fields that were mercilessly exposed to potential observation. She constantly scanned the terrain, noting any sign of enemy activity, always planning the next move, always calculating the odds. Each soldier followed her with growing respect and trust, having witnessed her resourcefulness and courage firsthand. They were aware that survival depended entirely on her instincts and leadership. By late afternoon, they reached a small stream that had to be crossed to continue south. Nancy inspected the shallow water carefully, ensuring that it could be crossed without alerting nearby German patrols. The soldiers moved in pairs, one steadying the other as they made their way across the slippery stones. Nancy followed last, ensuring that every man made it safely to the far bank. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the sound of flowing water, the distant hum of artillery, and the quiet footsteps of those who had survived yet another stage of their perilous journey. As dusk approached, they neared the safe coordinates Nancy had memorized, a rendezvous with an Allied reconnaissance unit that could escort them further to safety. Yet even this final stretch was fraught with tension. German scouts could appear at any moment, and Nancy's every decision still carried the weight of life or death for the entire group. Her mind was sharp, her instincts honed, and her resolve unwavering. She knew that every choice she made, every risk she calculated, would determine not just the success of this mission, the survival of the men who had come to depend on her. And as the shadows deepened and night crept back across the ravaged landscape, Nancy Roberts pressed forward, undeterred, a young woman whose courage, intelligence, and unyielding determination continued to bend fate in favor of those who had no other hope. The enemy was relentless, the path dangerous, yet she moved with a certainty born of experience, intuition, and an unshakable belief in her own abilities. Every step forward was a testament to her skill, bravery, and the quiet heroism that would, one day, be remembered. Though history would seldom record her name, night had fallen fully, and the once distant sounds of artillery had grown louder, echoing across the devastated landscape. Nancy Roberts led her unit along a narrow, uneven path through the woods, her senses stretched to their limits. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf could mean discovery. Her eyes darted constantly, taking in the outline of every tree, the shadows of every broken structure. The men behind her moved silently, fatigued, but buoyed by the quiet authority she exuded. They had come to understand that Nancy's calm in the face of danger was more than courage. It was precision, a shield forged from intellect and instinct. As they reached the edge of a shallow valley, Nancy paused. Ahead, the faint glow of lanterns revealed a German ambush in preparation. Soldiers had scattered supplies across the ground, seemingly casual, but Nancy could see the pattern. They were setting a trap for anyone who attempted to pass through this area after dark. She signaled for the men to drop low behind fallen logs and rocks. Their hearts pounded in unison, but they obeyed her instructions without hesitation. They had learned that she rarely erred. Nancy examined the patrol positions carefully. There were 3 groups, one by the bridge across the creek, one near a partially destroyed barn, and a small squad moving along the northern ridge. A direct route would be suicide. Yet she had no alternative. Time was critical. The German reinforcements were moving steadily south, and every minute that passed increased the risk of the patrols discovering their presence. Nancy's mind raced, calculating every possibility, every escape route, every misstep the enemy might make. Then, quietly, she motioned for the first pair of soldiers to move. Her plan was simple but risky. Create a diversion to draw the attention of the patrols while guiding the rest of the unit along a hidden path she had scouted earlier. She handed one soldier a small canister of incendiary powder and instructed him to toss it near a pile of debris closer to the northern ridge. A small explosion and flare would mimic a disturbance, drawing the attention of that patrol away from the path Nancy intended to use. Her instructions were precise. Timing would make the difference between life and death. The canister ignited with a quiet pop, and flames flickered across the debris. Voices shouted in the distance, and boots pounded toward the source. Nancy waited, counting each second carefully. When the noise had drawn the northern squad away, she signaled the group to move along the hidden path. Their steps were careful, measured, silent. The men followed closely, trusting her judgment completely. Every heartbeat was amplified, each footstep a gamble, but they moved forward without incident. Suddenly, a sharp cry from the rear startled the group. One of the younger soldiers had slipped, sending a loose branch clattering to the ground. Nancy froze, calculating the risk. Behind them, German voices were rising, the soldiers evidently investigating the noise. Nancy's voice cut through the tense air in a whisper. "Move faster, keep low, stay behind me." Her command was firm, controlled, without panic. Every man obeyed, their survival hinging on her quick thinking. The hidden path led them towards a small, partially destroyed farmhouse. Nancy guided them inside, using the wrecked walls for cover and vantage. She motioned for the men to lie low as she assessed the next step. From the broken window frame, she could see German patrols reorganizing, some moving back toward the ridge, others doubling down on their search near the creek. She had less than 15 minutes to get the entire unit to safety. One mistake now would be catastrophic. Thinking quickly, Nancy instructed a soldier to toss small rocks in the opposite direction, creating multiple points of attention. The enemy soldiers paused, unsure of the source of the noises. Nancy used this hesitation, leading the men quietly through a back alley that wound between charred cottages and collapsed barns. Their path was narrow and fraught with danger, but every step was deliberate. Nancy's foresight, built on meticulous observation and intelligence from previous missions, guided them safely past several additional patrols. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly as the group advanced through the ruined village, every corner threatening exposure. Yet Nancy never wavered. She reminded herself that fear was a tool, not a master, and she used it to sharpen her senses rather than dull them. Her ability to anticipate enemy movements, her knowledge of the terrain, and her calm demeanor kept the men moving, alive, and focused. At one point, they reached a shallow river. The current was swift, and the bank was exposed. Nancy examined it quickly, noting weak spots where German sentries could spot them. She instructed two of the soldiers to scout a crossing point slightly upstream, using shadows to obscure their movement. Once verified, the group began crossing, Nancy last, scanning the water and banks for signs of any approaching danger. One soldier stumbled on a slippery rock, but Nancy's steady hand caught him before he fell, whispering encouragement that barely rose above the sound of flowing water. Once across, Nancy paused only enough to signal the rest of the group before pressing onward. Dawn was approaching, and visibility would increase the risk of discovery. Her mind raced ahead, calculating next steps, where to rest, where to hide, and which landmarks could provide temporary cover. Every decision had consequences. Every miscalculation could mean death. Yet she moved with determination, never doubting that she could guide these men to safety. By mid-morning, the unit had reached a dense forest on higher ground. Nancy instructed the men to rest briefly, keeping them out of sight from possible aerial reconnaissance. She moved quietly among them, observing fatigue, offering words of encouragement, and checking for injuries. Several soldiers bore fresh cuts and bruises, but morale remained intact because they trusted her. She had become more than a courier. She was a leader, a strategist, and a guardian. Her presence was a beacon of hope in the darkness of war. Nancy's mind continued to scan the surrounding terrain. German patrols were still active, but she had successfully misdirected them several times. She reviewed the upcoming route, considering options that would allow them to link up with an Allied reconnaissance unit later in the day. The plan required courage, precision, and unwavering focus. Nancy understood the stakes, and every step she had taken, every risk she had assumed, had been to ensure that these men would survive the dangers that loomed at every turn. As the soldiers settled briefly, Nancy Roberts looked out over the horizon, aware that the war outside this small forest was vast, relentless, and unforgiving. Yet in that moment, her strategy, courage, and intellect had bent the tide of fate, turning a seemingly hopeless situation into one where survival was still possible. Every step, calculated move, every quiet decision had carried the weight of life itself. And though history might never fully record her actions, those soldiers knew, in their hearts, that Nancy Roberts had given them the chance to live another day. By mid-afternoon, the sun had climbed high enough to cast long shadows across the broken landscape, but the danger was far from over. Nancy Roberts led the men carefully through a patchwork of devastated villages and farmland, each step calculated, each turn guided by her uncanny sense of timing. She knew the German reinforcements were mobilizing and that any misstep could expose the group to artillery fire or sudden patrols. The men, though exhausted, followed her without question. Every footfall, every whisper, every deliberate pause was part of the dance of survival that Nancy had mastered. The first sign of immediate danger came when a German scout unit emerged from the tree line to their left, rifles held loosely but ready, scanning for movement. Nancy froze, crouched low, assessing their formation. Their patrol was small but fast-moving, and if they spotted her group, there would be no room for error. She motioned silently for the soldiers to press against a low, crumbling stone wall, blending into the broken landscape. Their breaths came in shallow whispers, every heartbeat a reminder that the night's survival had been just the beginning. Nancy's mind raced, calculating options. She could attempt a direct diversion, draw the patrol away from the group, or maneuver the soldiers along a side path through the adjacent fields. The open fields offered no cover, but she had memorized an old irrigation ditch that could conceal movement, allowing them to cross undetected. Timing would be critical. One misstep, one careless sound, and the patrol would raise the alarm. Her training as an OSS courier had prepared her for this, but the stakes now were magnitudes higher. More lives depended on her judgment than ever before. She chose the ditch. Slowly, deliberately, she led the men away from the immediate path of the scouts, ducking into the narrow trench carved into the earth by months of rain. The ditch was muddy and uneven, but it provided enough cover. One soldier stumbled over a loose stone, letting out a stifled curse. Nancy's hand shot out, steadying him, a silent reminder that hesitation was deadly. They pressed forward, inch by inch, the ditch guiding them under the radar of the enemy. Above them, the German scouts moved, unaware, their voices distant but carrying over the open ground. Nancy exhaled quietly, the first breath she allowed herself in over an hour. Once they reached the far side, she assessed the surrounding terrain. A burned-out farmhouse loomed nearby, offering temporary shelter. She motioned for the men to follow her inside. The interior was dark, the smell of smoke and charred wood filling their senses, but it was sufficient for concealment. Nancy crouched in the shadows, scanning windows and doorways for any sign of the approaching patrols. The men around her were tense, silent, yet trusting completely in her instincts. They had learned the hard truth. Nancy Roberts saw what others could not, anticipated what others failed to perceive, and acted decisively where hesitation could be fatal. Suddenly, a distant explosion shook the earth, sending dust and debris cascading from the farmhouse walls. German artillery fire had found a nearby village, and though it was not directed at them, the vibrations were enough to rattle nerves and heighten tension. Nancy's eyes narrowed. She had to move the unit before the German forces reorganized, lest their path be cut off entirely. She whispered quick instructions, outlining a route through a partially overgrown path along a ridge, a route that would allow them to avoid both the patrols and potential artillery fire. Every detail was essential. Miscalculating the path could be fatal. The men moved quietly, keeping low, following Nancy with an almost instinctive obedience. Her figure moved ahead, a silhouette of calm determination, scanning the forest edges and the open fields beyond. The terrain was rough, littered with debris, but she navigated it with precision. The German reinforcements were moving systematically, but Nancy's prior observation had given her a predictive advantage. She anticipated their patrol patterns, adjusted the group's pace accordingly, and whispered constant reminders to maintain silence. Every second counted. Every step could mean life or death. Halfway along the ridge, a sudden shout echoed from below. German voices, sharp and commanding. One of the soldiers froze, eyes wide. Nancy reacted instantly, pressing him flat against the ground and signaling for absolute silence. The patrol below had spotted a movement too far down the ridge, likely another Allied unit or a stray civilian, and had raised an alarm. The group remained hidden, hearts hammering, every second feeling like an eternity. Nancy's calculations were precise. She had accounted for this scenario, and her plan was unfolding as intended. When the patrol finally moved on, Nancy continued, her focus unbroken. She led the men to a narrow footbridge crossing a creek, the water rushing swiftly below. The bridge was partially damaged, rotting planks threatening to give weight with any sudden weight. One misstep could alert the enemy, or worse, cause a soldier to fall. Nancy went first, testing each plank, steadying herself, and then signaling the soldiers to cross one at a time. Her calm composure reassured them, though every creak of the wood sent adrenaline surging through their veins. One soldier paused, frozen mid-step. Nancy's whisper cut through the tension. "Keep moving, trust me." Across the bridge, Nancy spotted a farmhouse still intact at the edge of a cornfield. It offered temporary shelter and a vantage point to assess the surrounding area. She led the group inside, motioning for silence, and took a moment to assess their progress. They had evaded patrols, outwitted the German scouts, and crossed dangerous terrain. But they were still behind enemy lines. Her mind raced ahead, plotting the final leg of their journey to link up with the Allied reconnaissance team. Every decision, every turn, every whispered instruction was critical. As dusk approached, she prepared the soldiers for one final movement. They would need to navigate open farmland, exposed to potential aerial observation, to reach the rendezvous point. Nancy assessed the wind direction, the patterns of shadows, and the timing of enemy rotations. She instructed the men on exact spacing, precise movements, and the silent communication signals they had practiced. The tension was palpable, but the soldiers trusted her implicitly. Nancy Roberts was not just leading them physically, she was leading them through fear, through strategy, and through sheer will. The night stretched long as they moved, every step a careful balance of caution and speed. German patrols moved nearby, artillery echoed in the distance, and yet the unit followed Nancy with unwavering faith. She had guided them through the most dangerous hours, using intellect, courage, and unshakable resolve. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated, every breath measured. By the time they finally glimpsed the faint lights of the Allied rendezvous, exhaustion and relief mingled in equal measure. The men had survived because of her, not by chance, but by the precise brilliance of Nancy's strategy and execution. And though the night still held dangers, Nancy's presence was a beacon, a calculated force guiding men through chaos, a reminder that courage combined with intelligence could bend fate itself. History might never remember her name in the official records, but those who survived that night would carry the knowledge of her heroism forever. The night deepened, cloaking the landscape in shadows that both concealed and threatened. Nancy Roberts led her unit cautiously through the rolling hills outside the village. The distant rumble of artillery, now a constant reminder that enemy forces were never far. The men were exhausted, their bodies aching from the relentless march. Yet they moved in near-perfect silence, guided by the unyielding presence of their young leader. Every step required concentration, every heartbeat a test of endurance, and every decision held the weight of life or death. Nancy's eyes swept the darkness, searching for movement, listening for the faintest clue of German patrols or hidden snipers. She had memorized this terrain during prior missions, noting every ditch, ridge, and abandoned farm that could serve as cover. Her mind raced, calculating multiple contingencies for every potential threat. Ahead, a faint glimmer caught her eye, a reflection of metal in the moonlight. She froze, signaling the soldiers to drop flat against the soft earth. The glimmer was brief, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Nancy's intuition told her it was a German scout, moving methodically through the field to check for movement. She waited, counting slowly in her mind, giving the patrol enough time to move past without noticing the group. When the coast seemed clear, she guided the soldiers forward, each step deliberate, each movement measured to minimize noise. Their survival depended on her precision, on her ability to anticipate danger before it materialized. Hours passed in tense silence, punctuated only by the distant crackle of gunfire and the occasional shout from far-off villages. Nancy led the men through a network of ruined cottages, using the rubble as cover and vantage points. She whispered instructions for staying low, for maintaining spacing, for observing shadows that might conceal enemy movement. The men were tired, hungry, and fearful, but every command from Nancy carried authority, and their trust in her instincts kept them moving. Then, suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of snapping wood. A German patrol had discovered the remnants of a barricade they had passed hours earlier, and their voices rose, sharp and commanding. Nancy froze, calculating the risk. The patrol's attention could divert at any moment, but a misstep now could expose the group. She signaled for absolute stillness, crouching behind a fallen fence as the patrol moved closer, their boots crunching over gravel. Nancy acted quickly. She spotted a loose plank among the ruins and nudged it subtly, creating the sound of shifting debris far from their location. The German soldiers paused, one stepping forward to investigate. Their attention diverted, Nancy guided the unit to a nearby culvert beneath the road, providing concealment from view. The soldiers followed without hesitation, crawling through the narrow passage, muscles straining, hearts hammering in near unison. Every second was critical, and Nancy's calm focus ensured their passage remained undetected. Emerging from the culvert, Nancy led them into a dense thicket that masked their approach to the rendezvous point. The reconnaissance team they were to meet lay just beyond an open field, but crossing it meant exposure to potential enemy observation. Nancy scanned the terrain, noting wind direction, the positions of shadows, and distant movement. She whispered final instructions to the men. Move in staggered formation, stay low, and maintain silence. Her words were calm but urgent, a blend of authority and reassurance. Step by step, they advanced across the field. The men moved like shadows, careful to avoid dry patches of grass that might crackle underfoot. Nancy stayed just ahead, eyes trained on the far side where the faint glow of Allied lights marked safety. Then, a German sentry appeared at the edge of the field, his flashlight sweeping across the terrain. Nancy froze, analyzing his patrol pattern. Timing was critical. A misstep now would be catastrophic. She waited until the sentry's back was turned, then signaled the men forward in precise, silent movements. The group edged closer, hearts pounding, muscles tense. Another sentry emerged from the tree line, this one moving quickly toward their path. Nancy's mind raced, considering the odds. There was no time to retreat. She whispered a plan to the nearest soldier. Toss a small bundle of debris to the left, drawing the patrol's attention, then advance along the hidden ridge. The soldier executed perfectly, and the patrol diverted just long enough for the group to continue toward the rendezvous point. Finally, they reached the edge of the field, where a small farmhouse provided cover and vantage point. Nancy motioned for the men to crouch as she peered out, confirming that the reconnaissance team's vehicles were visible in the distance. Relief surged briefly, but she maintained focus. Danger could still appear at any moment. The soldiers were within reach of safety, but Nancy knew the final approach required vigilance. She guided them along the last stretch, using shadows and terrain to shield their movement. One soldier stumbled, almost calling attention to the group, but Nancy's quick reflexes allowed her to steady him without a sound. Each step was calculated, every movement deliberate. When they finally reached the rendezvous point, the Allied reconnaissance team was waiting, rifles at the ready, but recognizing the exhausted Americans and the young woman who had led them. The team quickly assessed the soldiers, checking for injuries and confirming numbers. Nancy remained vigilant, scanning the surrounding fields, ensuring no enemy forces were nearby. The men, now safe, expressed silent gratitude. Their lives had been carried through darkness, fear, and danger by Nancy Roberts' courage, intelligence, and unyielding determination. For a moment, the weight of what they had survived settled over the group. Nancy allowed herself a brief exhale, acknowledging the success of the mission. They had evaded multiple patrols, navigated treacherous terrain, and survived under constant threat. The soldiers she had guided were alive largely because of her skill, her foresight, and her composure under extreme pressure. Every decision she made had been precise, every action deliberate, and the result was survival against overwhelming odds. Though the war continued beyond this moment, Nancy Roberts had demonstrated that courage combined with intelligence can alter the course of fate. She had become more than a courier. She was a guardian, a strategist, and a hero, whose actions would leave a lasting imprint on those who survived. The soldiers, exhausted but alive, knew that history might never record her deeds, but they would carry the knowledge of her heroism in their hearts forever. And as the night faded into dawn, Nancy Roberts remained vigilant, aware that the world was still at war, but confident that for now she had saved lives through intellect, courage, and unwavering resolve. The first rays of dawn cast a pale light across the ravaged landscape, illuminating the scars of war, charred fields, shattered villages, and the remnants of battles that had left no place untouched. Nancy Roberts stood quietly at the edge of a small clearing, her eyes scanning the horizon even though the immediate danger had passed. The soldiers she had guided were now resting nearby, tending to minor injuries, eating small rations, their faces a mix of exhaustion, relief, and awe. They knew, without a doubt, that their survival was because of her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. Nancy took a moment to reflect, though there was little time for sentiment. Every successful step she had led had required calculations, courage, and an almost instinctive ability to anticipate the enemy's moves. From the moment they had left their hiding place the previous night, through forests, abandoned villages, and treacherous fields, she had maneuvered them past patrols, ambushes, and traps. Her mind had never wavered, even when danger had seemed inevitable. She had been the quiet force guiding them through chaos, bending fate with every choice she made. The soldiers approached her quietly, their expressions speaking volumes. One young man, barely older than she was, clasped her shoulder in gratitude, unable to find words. Another handed her a canteen, a small gesture of thanks, and even in that simple exchange, there was respect, reverence, and an acknowledgement of her skill. Nancy's lips curved into a small, restrained smile, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning for any remaining threats. She had learned long ago that war left no room for complacency. Survival was earned step by careful step. As they began the final stretch toward the rendezvous point with the Allied reconnaissance team, Nancy reflected on the countless dangers they had faced. The night had tested every ounce of her ability, from anticipating German patrol movements to creating diversions that allowed the soldiers to pass undetected. She remembered the fallen debris that had alerted nearby scouts, the narrow ditch under the moonlight that concealed them, and the bridges that groaned underfoot, threatening to betray their presence. Every moment had required courage, foresight, and composure under pressure. And yet, through it all, she had led them successfully. The reconnaissance team met them at the designated point, vehicles hidden partially by trees and old barns. Nancy approached cautiously, still analyzing the terrain, ensuring that their path remained secure. The team quickly assessed the soldiers, confirming numbers and checking for injuries. Relief washed over the men, but Nancy remained vigilant, her training insisting that every detail be accounted for, even in moments of apparent safety. The soldiers began sharing their experience in hushed tones, recounting how Nancy had guided them past patrols, through ambushes, and across treacherous terrain. They spoke of the calculated diversion she had orchestrated, the way she had maintained composure when danger loomed closest, and the quiet authority that had kept them moving even when fear threatened to overwhelm them. It was clear that they understood the magnitude of what she had accomplished. They had not just survived, they had been led by a mind capable of outthinking the enemy, a strategist whose courage was as deliberate as it was fearless. Nancy allowed herself a brief pause to breathe. The sun now rose fully, illuminating the surrounding fields and villages with a soft golden light. She looked back at the path they had traversed. Forests dense with shadows, villages reduced to rubble, and fields scarred by artillery. Every step of that journey had been perilous, and yet here they were, alive, intact, and closer to safety because of her. In that moment, she realized that heroism was not always loud or celebrated. Often, it was quiet, deliberate, and invisible to the world, but its impact was no less profound. The reconnaissance team prepared to lead the soldiers to a safer area behind Allied lines. Nancy briefed them quickly, ensuring that the transition would be smooth, that no one would be left exposed. The team respected her instructions, recognizing the depth of her knowledge and the experience that had carried them through the previous night. As they began moving, the soldiers cast glances at Nancy, silent acknowledgment passing between them. She had saved their lives through intellect, courage, and an unwavering sense of duty. A hero whose deeds would be remembered by those who survived because of her. As they walked toward safety, Nancy reflected on the broader implications of her actions. War was chaotic, unpredictable, and merciless. Yet it was also a test of character, intellect, and resolve. In moments like these, one individual could alter the course of events, bending fate with courage, strategy, and careful calculation. Nancy had been that individual tonight. Calm under pressure, precise in her thinking, and fearless in execution. Every decision, from the smallest movement to the most daring diversion, had been made with the lives of the soldiers in mind. By the time they reached a secure location behind the Allied lines, the first rays of sunlight were breaking over the horizon, illuminating the devastation left by months of conflict. Nancy observed the soldiers safely handed over, medical checks performed, and the reconnaissance team preparing to escort them further to safety. Relief washed over her, though her vigilance remained. There was always more to consider, more planning to be done, more lives that might depend on quick thinking and courage under pressure. Yet in that moment, Nancy Roberts allowed herself a rare sense of accomplishment. She had outwitted enemy soldiers, protected her unit, and guided them through the deadliest hours with intelligence, bravery, and unwavering determination. Her actions would not appear in many history books, and the world might never fully know the scope of her heroism. But the lives she had saved carried the proof of her courage, and the impact of her actions would ripple silently through those who survived because she led them. As they began moving with the Allied reconnaissance team, casting glances of respect back at Nancy, she stood alone for a brief moment, taking in the quiet aftermath. The battlefield was still scarred, the world still at war. But here, in this small corner of Europe, a young woman's intellect, bravery, and unwavering resolve had bent fate in favor of life. Nancy Roberts had not just survived the night, she had ensured that others did as well, leaving a legacy of courage that would endure far beyond the shadows of the war. And, though her name might never be celebrated on banners or in monuments, those who lived because of her would carry her story in their hearts forever, a testament to the power of courage, intelligence, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Nancy Roberts had faced the darkest hours, outwitted enemy soldiers, and protected the lives of those who depended on her. In doing so, she had etched herself into the quiet, enduring history of heroism in World War II.